The U.S. Director of National Intelligence says China's upcoming space station poses a threat to America's national security. This is part of an annual intelligence report that explains how the Chinese space station forms part of Beijing's bigger effort to compromise U.S. security. Here are the details. The U.S. Director of National Intelligence released a report last month claiming that China's upcoming space station poses a threat to national security. This adds to experts calling for the U.S. to prepare a space defense system. Many claim that the U.S.'s current satellite infrastructure is very vulnerable to attack. Seeing that much of the U.S. military strategy is based on satellite technology like GPS, this does not seem to be an important issue for the U.S. The intelligence report also said that China is readying counter-space weapons to target U.S. satellites. Beijing continues to train its military space elements and field new ground and space-based anti-satellite weapons, the report said. That means they're developing things such as spacecraft that can intercept and capture U.S. satellites with robotic arms or simply destroy the satellites. The report states that China is already operating ground-based anti-satellite missiles intended to destroy satellites in Earth's orbit and ground-based lasers that can blind or damage space-based sensors in Earth's orbit. In February, researchers at the Center for Strategic and International Studies released a report titled Defense Against the Dark Arts in Space, Protecting Space Systems from Counter-Space Weapons. It details countermeasures the U.S. can take to defend against anti-satellite weapons. Do we have a new kind of space race on our hands? The answer might be yes, if Chinese President Xi Jinping has anything to do with it. On Thursday, he declared the latest step in China's manned space program an important pilot project in the building of a powerful nation in both technology and space, according to Reuters reporting quotes from Chinese state media. Here's what you need to know. China has launched the first module of its new Tiangong space station, according to the BBC. The module, known as Tianhe, is 16.6 meters long and 4.2 meters in diameter and will orbit Earth at an altitude of 340 to 450 kilometers or 210 to 280 miles. Once in orbit, the module will provide power and propulsion for the station and operate as the living quarters for astronauts. It will usually support 3 people at a time and 6 during crew changeovers, according to IEEE Spectrum. The Wentian and Mengtian modules, designed to house scientific experiments, will connect with Tianhe in 2021. Tianhe's other docking ports will allow crewed Shenzhou and Tianzhou spacecraft to dock with the station. After being blocked from joining the International Space Station by the U.S., China's new station will be closer in size to the Russian Mir station, according to IEEE Spectrum. It will weigh 66 metric tons versus the International Space Station's 420 metric tons. Space.com reports China followed a 3-step strategy to get to this stage, first building crewed spacecraft, followed by the mini space stations Tiangong 1 and 2. However, Tiangong 1 crashed to Earth in April 2018. Of course, the Tiangong station is by no means China's only space exploration project. It has already landed a rover on the far side of the moon, and according to the Associated Press, another Chinese rover is due to land on Mars within the next month. The huge 30-meter-tall core of a Chinese rocket is tumbling wildly through low Earth orbit and could crash anywhere on Earth in the coming days. The same type of Chinese rocket crashed into a village in West Africa a year ago. Here are the details. On Wednesday, April 28th, China launched a massive Long March 5B rocket that carried the first module of its planned space station into orbit. The Guardian reports that the core stage of this rocket was supposed to fall back to Earth in a controlled descent, but something went wrong, and the 30-meter-tall rocket stage started skipping on Earth's atmosphere. And no one knows where it will crash once the drag of Earth's atmosphere tugs it down to the planet's surface. Much of the core will likely burn up in the atmosphere, but there is a chance that some chunks of debris will survive the re-entry and rain down on the land or ocean. This, sadly, wouldn't be the first time. In May 2020, a Long March 5B rocket slammed through the atmosphere, partially burning up during its descent. The core fell largely into the Atlantic Ocean, but some debris landed in West Africa. According to the South China Morning Post, some chunks of debris crashed into houses and villages in Côte d'Ivoire, though thankfully no casualties were reported. On Tuesday, May 4th, the latest out-of-control Chinese rocket was orbiting Earth around once every 90 minutes at a speed of about 27,600 kilometers per hour and an altitude of more than 300 kilometers. The U.S. military has named it 2021-035B, and its path can be seen on websites that track objects in Earth's orbit. China says it's ready to become the first country to land and operate a rover on Mars on its first attempt. China's first-ever Mars mission arrived in Mars orbit a few months ago and is scheduled to release its Mars lander in a few days. Here are the details. The Chinese National Space Administration, or CNSA, says its Tianwen-1 orbiter will release its Zhurong Mars rover on May 17th. The orbiter arrived in Mars orbit on February 24th, carrying with it the rover and its landing cradle. The lander will detach from the orbiter and start to descend into Mars's thin atmosphere, protected by a heat shield that's designed to also slow the lander down with its sheer bluntness. Once the lander slows down enough, a large parachute will open and the heat shield will fall away, exposing the landing cradle. The cradle's landing legs would then deploy and the parachute would detach to let the lander fall freely. The CNSA says the lander would then fire a number of rockets to slow its descent, while also keeping the lander in an upright position until it touches down. After touchdown, the lander would deploy a ramp while the rover deploys its sensor arms and solar panels. If the mission is successful, China would become the first country to land a rover on Mars on its first attempt. The Zhurong rover is carrying 6 pieces of scientific equipment. After landing, it would survey the surroundings to study Martian soil, geomorphology, and atmosphere. It would also look for signs of subsurface water ice.
NASA plans to build a base on the moon as soon as the middle of this decade, and now we're starting to get an idea of what it will look like. NASA submitted its plans for a lunar base camp to the National Space Council in a 13-page report entitled NASA's Plan for Sustained Lunar Exploration and Development on April 2nd. The plans are part of NASA's Artemis program to send humans back to the moon as early as 2024. As part of the Artemis program, a gateway outpost in lunar orbit will serve as a command and control center for operations on the moon's surface. Astronauts will live in the outpost and conduct scientific research there. Spacecraft arriving from Earth will dock at the gateway, and lunar modules will travel to and from the outpost to the moon. NASA plans to build its Artemis base camp near the moon's south pole. The base camp will provide a fixed outpost for exploration and in the long term would include a landing pad and infrastructure for power, radiation shielding, and waste disposal and storage. A Lunar Terrain Vehicle, or LTV, will transport crew around base. Like the Apollo program's Lunar Roving Vehicle, the LTV will be an unenclosed rover. Astronauts driving it will wear spacesuits that have been specifically designed for the Artemis program. For exploration beyond the lunar base camp, astronauts will use a habitable mobility platform, a larger pressurized rover with living space and amenities for trips across the moon lasting up to 45 days. The habitable mobility platform will be the primary residence for surface missions, but a Lunar Foundation surface habitat at the base camp will provide a more permanent habitat for as many as 4 crew members on shorter surface stays. In an April 3rd article on its website, NASA said it envisions sending 4 astronauts to the Gateway for a multi-month stay to simulate a trip to Mars. Later, 2 crew members would travel to the lunar surface and explore with the habitable mobility platform. The 4 astronauts would then be reunited aboard the Gateway for another multi-month stay to simulate the return trip to Earth. NASA said these missions will be by far the longest duration human deep space missions in history.
NASA is trying to get to the moon in 2024. Here is the latest development. NASA has released images of its Lunar Gateway space station ahead of its proposed launch of 2 modules in 2024. In a statement released on its website, NASA describes the station as an outpost orbiting the moon that provides vital support for a sustainable, long-term human return to the lunar surface. Gateway will work as a kind of pit stop for astronauts on their way to the moon. NASA announced in February that after arriving at the station, astronauts will be delivered to the surface of the moon via a lunar lander built by Elon Musk's SpaceX. Eventually, it is hoped that Gateway will operate as a staging point for missions to the moon, NASA states on its website, but it could also operate as a port for spacecraft going beyond the moon into deep space. The process will begin in 2024 with the dual launch of the power and propulsion element of the station and the habitation and logistics outpost, which will initially provide living space for astronauts manning lunar missions, according to NASA. Gateway is an international project, with NASA listing its partners as the Canadian, Japanese, and European space agencies.
For more news animations and explainers, hit the subscribe and bell button to join the TomoNews family. Thanks for watching.